Scientists tried to hide this for decades. When AI finally decoded the Antikythera mechanism's missing half, it revealed something so advanced that experts refused to believe it was real. This ancient Greek computer could do things we didn't reinvent until the 1400s. But here's what terrifies historians. Someone built this impossible machine over 2,000 years ago, then every trace of how to make it vanished from history. No records, no copies, nothing. It's as if the technology was deliberately erased. What did the Greeks know that we're only now rediscovering? And why did this knowledge disappear so completely? In a quiet corner of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens sits what many scientists consider the most important technological artifact ever recovered from the ancient world. It doesn't look like much at first glance. Corroded bronze fragments, darkened by 2,000 years beneath the Mediterranean Sea, rest behind protective glass. Most visitors walk past, without a second thought. But these pieces represent something that shouldn't exist. They're the remains of a machine so advanced that nothing comparable would appear again until the 14th century. The device is called the Antikythera mechanism, named after the small Greek island near where it was found. When researchers first began to understand what they were looking at, the discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. This wasn't just an ancient tool or a decorative object, it was a computer. Not in the modern sense with circuits and processors, but a true computing device nonetheless. Instead of digital electronics, it relied on a complex system of bronze gears and wheels, precisely cut and arranged to perform calculations that would have seemed almost magical to anyone who didn't understand its inner workings. The mechanism operates on purely mechanical principles. Turn a handle on the side and the gears begin to move. As they rotate, different parts of the machine track different pieces of information simultaneously. The Greeks who built this device understood that you could encode mathematical relationships into the physical spacing of gear teeth. If one gear has 60 teeth and meshes with another that has 30, the second gear will turn twice as fast. String together enough of these gears in the right arrangement and you can model incredibly complex patterns. That's exactly what the ancient engineers did. But here's where the story becomes frustrating. The machine that sits in the museum today is incomplete. Roughly half of the original device survived the centuries underwater. The other half is simply gone, dissolved by salt water or scattered across the seabed, lost forever. What remains is like having half of a book with critical pages missing. You can see that something remarkable was written, but you can't read the whole story. The fragments that did survive tell us quite a bit, though. The back portion of the mechanism is relatively well preserved. It contains large spiral dials with tiny inscriptions in ancient Greek, marking out time periods and astronomical events. Researchers can see exactly what this part of the machine was designed to do. It tracked the phases of the moon, predicted eclipses, and marked important dates in the Greek calendar. The engineering is precise, the calculations accurate. Whoever made this understood celestial mechanics at a level that historians once thought impossible for the ancient world. The front of the mechanism is where the real mystery lies. This was apparently the main display, the part that showed the user the information they were seeking. But it was also the most exposed part of the device, and it took the worst damage during its time in the sea. Most of it is simply missing. Small fragments of the front display survived, including pieces of the outer casing with inscriptions that provide tantalizing clues. But the gears that drove it, the hands that showed the outputs, the mechanism's beating heart, all of that is gone. For more than a century after the mechanism's discovery, this incomplete state meant that researchers could only guess at its full capabilities. They knew it was extraordinary. They could see that much from what survived. But the gaps were enormous. Historians could study the back dials and understand those functions. They could examine the fragments of gears and see the craftsmanship. But they couldn't answer the most important question. What did this machine actually do when it was complete and working? That question haunted researchers for generations. Some proposed theories, others built partial reconstructions. But without knowing what the front display showed or how it was calculated, any complete understanding remained out of reach. The mechanism became one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. Everyone agreed it was important, but no one could fully explain it. Then something changed. In the last 2 decades, technologies opened up possibilities that earlier researchers could never have imagined. High-energy X-ray scanning allowed scientists to see inside the corroded bronze without damaging it further. They could trace gears hidden beneath layers of mineral deposits. They could read inscriptions that were invisible to the naked eye, worn away by time but still present in the metal itself. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from reprocessing old scanning data with new techniques. Earlier scans from 2005 had captured enormous amounts of information, but the technology of the time couldn't extract everything. Some slices were blurred, some sections had distortions. When researchers went back to that same data years later with better processing methods, new details emerged. Letters that were unclear became legible. Gear positions that were ambiguous became certain. Artificial intelligence played a role too. Specialized programs trained on ancient Greek texts could analyze damaged inscriptions and predict missing letters with surprising accuracy. These weren't wild guesses. The AI systems understood the patterns of the Greek language, the common phrases used in technical writing, and the way ancient engineers described their work. When combined with human expertise, this approach could narrow down the possibilities significantly. Mechanical engineering provided another piece of the puzzle. Modern researchers started asking a simple question. If you had to build this machine using only the tools and materials available in ancient Greece, how would you do it? They knew the Greeks had bronze. They knew they had files and drills. They knew they understood basic gear ratios. Working within those constraints, engineers began designing mechanisms that could produce the required outputs. Some designs worked, others didn't fit the space available or contradicted the surviving fragments. Slowly, through trial and error, a clearer picture emerged. The process wasn't about speculation or imagination. It was about taking hard evidence, the actual bronze fragments, the real inscriptions, the measurable dimensions, and working out what could physically fit together. Every proposed reconstruction had to satisfy multiple requirements at once. The gears had to mesh properly, the ratios had to match the astronomical periods described in the texts. Everything had to fit within the surviving frame. And most importantly, the design had to be something that ancient craftsmen could actually have built. What this painstaking reconstruction revealed was extraordinary. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't just a calendar or a simple astronomical tool. It was a complete mechanical model of the cosmos as the ancient Greeks understood it. It could calculate the positions of celestial bodies years into the future or past. It could predict eclipses with remarkable accuracy. It could show the phases of the moon, track the ancient Olympic Games cycle, and display astronomical osubeld, phenomena that modern people need computers to calculate. This is what makes the mechanism so unsettling to historians. It proves that ancient Greek technology reached a level of sophistication that we simply didn't think was possible. For years, the standard story went that precision gearing and complex mechanical devices were medieval inventions developed slowly over centuries in Europe. But here was proof that the Greeks had mastered these techniques more than 1,000 years earlier. And then, somehow, that knowledge was lost. The mechanism wasn't improved upon or developed further. It vanished from history for 2 millennia. The story of how the Antikythera mechanism came to light is almost as remarkable as the device itself. Like many great archaeological discoveries, it happened entirely by accident. No one was searching for ancient technology. No one expected to find anything unusual. The discovery came about because of bad weather, professional divers doing what they knew best, and a moment of sheer terror on the Mediterranean seabed. It was the spring of 1900. A crew of sponge divers from the small Greek island of Symi was working their way through the waters of the Aegean Sea. These weren't casual divers or hobbyists. Sponge diving was serious, dangerous work. The men descended to depths that would kill an untrained person, wearing heavy canvas suits and copper helmets, breathing air pumped down through hoses. They worked the seabed for natural sponges, which were valuable commodities in the Mediterranean trade. It was back-breaking labor with real risks, but for the people of Symi, it was a way of life. The crew was led by Captain Dimitrios Kondos, an experienced diver who knew these waters well. They had been working near the island of Crete when the weather turned bad. Spring storms in the Aegean can be fierce, and the smart move was to find shelter and wait it out. Kondos directed his boat to anchor near a small, rocky island called Antikythera, the Mao. Island sits between Crete and the Greek mainland, in a channel where ships have traveled for thousands of years. It's remote, mostly uninhabited, just a waypoint for vessels moving through the region. While they waited for the weather to improve, the divers decided they might as well work. There was no point sitting idle on the boat when there might be sponges below. One of the crew, a diver named Elias Stadiatis, suited up and went over the side. The location wasn't particularly promising, just a rocky slope dropping away into deeper water, but you never knew where you might find a good sponge bed. Stadiatis descended through the water column, the pressure increasing with every meter. At around 45 meters down, more than 140 feet, he reached the bottom. The depth was substantial, even for experienced divers. At that depth, nitrogen narcosis becomes a real concern, a condition where the compressed nitrogen in the air affects the brain, causing confusion and poor amatosen, judgment. Divers of the era called it the rapture of the deep. What Stadiatis saw when he reached the bottom stopped him cold. Through the murky water, he could make out shapes that looked disturbingly human: arms, legs, torsos, faces staring back at him from the seabed. His first thought, quite reasonably, was that he had stumbled onto some kind of mass grave. Multiple bodies lying on the ocean floor would be disturbing under any circumstances. But down at that depth, with limited visibility and the effects of nitrogen narcosis potentially setting in, it must have been genuinely frightening. Stadiatis didn't stay to investigate. He yanked on his signal line, the communication method divers used to talk to the crew on the surface, and demanded to be pulled up immediately. When he reached the boat and his helmet was removed, he tried to explain what he had seen. The other divers were skeptical. A pile of bodies on the seabed? It seemed unlikely. More likely, Stadiatis' Suati had been affected by the depth and was seeing things that weren't there. Captain Kondos decided to see for himself. He suited up and made the descent to the same location. When he came back up, he was carrying proof that Stadiatis hadn't been hallucinating. In his hand was a single bronze arm, corroded and covered in marine growth, but unmistakably ancient. The bodies on the seabed weren't bodies at all. They were statues. What the divers had found was a Roman-era shipwreck, and it was loaded with treasures. The ship had apparently been carrying a cargo of artwork, possibly looted from Greece and being transported to Rome. When it went down, likely during a storm, everything on board sank with it. For more than 2,000 years, bronze and marble statues had lain scattered across the seabed, slowly being covered by sediment and marine life. The Greek government was notified immediately. This was a significant archaeological find, and officials recognized it as such. Over the next several months, the divers worked the site systematically, bringing up statue after statue. There were bronze figures of athletes and philosophers. There were marble sculptures of gods and heroes. They recovered jewelry, coins, pottery, pieces of furniture, and glassware, everything that a wealthy Roman household might want to display. The work was incredibly difficult and dangerous. The depth meant that divers could only stay down for short periods. The wreck site was on a slope, and dislodging one object could cause others to slide into deeper water and be lost. Several divers were injured during the recovery effort. One man died, but the potential historical value kept them going. Crate after crate of artifacts was brought to the surface and carefully packed for transport. In 1901, the recovered items arrived at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. It was a major event. The museum staff had to catalogue and examine hundreds of objects. The bronze statues alone were remarkable. Bronze was valuable and was usually melted down and reused in ancient times, so surviving bronze statues from the classical period are extremely rare. Here was an entire collection of them. Among all these treasures, though, there was one item that attracted no attention whatsoever. It was just a corroded lump of material, bronze and wood fused together with mineral deposits from the sea. It looked like debris, frankly. Compared to the beautiful statues and jewelry, it seemed like nothing more than scrap. The museum staff set it aside with other fragments and wreckage from the ship. There was more important work to do. That lump of corroded material sat ignored for months. Museum workers walked past it countless times. It was just another piece of junk from the wreck, not worth a second glance. But on May 17, 1902, a museum scholar named Valerios Stais happened to take a closer look. What caught his attention was a small detail protruding from the corrosion. It looked like teeth. Not animal teeth, or anything biological, but precisely cut teeth like you would find on a gear. Stais examined it more carefully. As he studied the lump of corrosion, he realized there were multiple gears visible. They were arranged in some kind of pattern, connected to each other. This wasn't debris from the ship's equipment. It wasn't a piece of cargo that happened to have gears on it. This was something else entirely. Someone had deliberately built a device with multiple interlocking gears, and it had been carefully constructed with considerable skill. The discovery sent ripples through the archaeological community, though not everyone believed what Stace was claiming. Some scholars thought it must be a medieval device that had somehow contaminated the ancient wreck site. Others suggested it might be a modern piece of equipment that had fallen onto the site in recent times. The idea that ancient Greeks could build something with precision gearing seemed impossible to many experts. Surely such technology didn't exist in the classical world, but as more careful examination was done, the evidence became undeniable. The device was unquestionably ancient. It had been underwater for the same length of time as the other artifacts. The style of the Greek letters inscribed on it matched the period of the shipwreck, and most tellingly, it had been found fused to other objects in the wreck, proving it had lain there undisturbed for centuries. Today, 82 fragments of the mechanism survive. That represents about 1/3 of the original machine, based on calculations of how large the complete device must have been. The rest is gone, broken apart and lost in the sea, or dissolved by chemical reactions over the centuries. What remains is precious beyond measure. Those surviving fragments preserve 30 interlocking bronze gears. Each gear was cut by hand, without the benefit of machine tools. The teeth are remarkably uniform and precise. The largest gear measures over 13 centimeters, across roughly 5 inches, with teeth carefully spaced around its circumference. Smaller gears mesh with larger ones in specific ratios, each one serving a particular function in the overall calculation. The level of craftsmanship visible in these fragments is extraordinary. Ancient Greek metalworkers were skilled, certainly, but this goes beyond typical bronze work. This required someone who understood not just how to shape metal, but how to create precise mechanical components that would work together reliably. The gear teeth had to be the right size and spacing, or they would jam. The axles had to be straight and smooth, or friction would stop the mechanism from turning. Every part had to be made with care. All of these fragments are still housed in Athens, carefully preserved in controlled conditions. The corrosion can't be reversed, and the fragments remain marked by their time in the sea. But they're stable now, protected from further deterioration. Scientists can study them, measure them, X-ray them, but they can't restore them to their original condition. What you see is what survived, scarred but readable. These pieces aren't guesses or reconstructions. They're real artifacts, solid evidence of what ancient craftsmen could accomplish. Every theory about the mechanism, every proposed reconstruction, every claim about its capabilities must start with these fragments. They are the foundation. They are the proof that this machine actually existed and that it worked according to principles we can still measure and understand today. For decades after Valerios Staes first identified the gear teeth in 1902, the Antikythera mechanism remained more of a mystery than an understood artifact. Researchers could see that it was complex. They could count the visible gears and trace some of the connections between them. But much of the device was hidden beneath thick layers of corrosion and mineral deposits. Looking at the fragments with the naked eye, or even under a magnifying glass, revealed only so much. The real structure was locked inside. The first major technological breakthrough came in the 1970s when researchers gained access to X-ray equipment. Standard radiography could penetrate the corrosion and show what lay beneath the surface. For the first time, scientists could see gears that were completely hidden from view. They could trace connections between components. They could start to understand how the mechanism worked as a complete system rather than just a collection of parts. These early X-rays revealed that the mechanism was even more complex than anyone had imagined. There weren't just a handful of gears, there were dozens of them, arranged in sophisticated patterns. Some gears were mounted on the same axis but could rotate independently. Others were connected through elaborate gear trains that transformed the rotation of one part into completely different motion in another part. The level of engineering was impressive, but the images had limitations. X-ray technology of that era could show that something was there, but the details were often unclear. The decisive moment came in 2005. A joint research team from Britain and Greece brought cutting-edge scanning technology directly into the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. At the center of their effort was a massive computed tomography scanner, a device that weighed 12 tons and had earned the nickname Blade Runner from the technicians who operated it. This wasn't medical CT scanning equipment. It was industrial-grade machinery designed to examine dense materials like metal castings and aerospace components. The scanner worked by firing high-energy X-rays through the bronze fragments from multiple angles. As it rotated around each piece, it captured thousands of individual images. Computer software then processed these images, stacking them together to create three-dimensional maps of the internal structure. Unlike a standard X-ray that produces the flat image, CT scanning could show every layer of the object separately. Researchers could virtually slice through the mechanism at any angle they wanted, examining one thin layer at a time. Working alongside the CT scanner was a different kind of imaging system based on reflectance technology. This device used carefully controlled lighting to photograph the surface of the fragments under different conditions. By changing the angle and intensity of the light, then combining multiple photographs mathematically, the system could reveal surface features that were invisible under normal viewing. Scratches that had been worn nearly smooth became visible. Faint inscriptions emerged from the corrosion. What this combination of technologies revealed was extraordinary. Hidden inside the corroded fragments were thousands of Greek letters. They weren't random marks or maker's stamps, they were complete sentences, technical descriptions, and user instructions. Someone had engraved an entire manual into the bronze plates of the mechanism. The text explained what the device did, how to operate it, what the different displays meant. It was like finding an instruction booklet for an ancient computer. The discovery of this text transformed research on the mechanism. Instead of guessing what various parts might have done, researchers could read descriptions written by the people who built it. The inscriptions explained the astronomical cycles the machine tracked. They described the spiral dials on the back and what each one displayed. They provided the kind of detail that makes reconstruction possible rather than purely speculative. But there was a problem. Despite the sophisticated scanning equipment, some of the data had issues. The scanner had failed to capture certain slices properly. Some sections had distortions where the X-rays hadn't penetrated evenly. For researchers trying to read damaged text where a single letter might be critical, these gaps were frustrating. In ancient Assyrian Greek, changing one letter can completely alter the meaning of a word. Missing even a few characters could leave entire passages incomprehensible. The solution came years later, in 2018, when researchers decided to revisit the original scanning data. Computer processing has improved significantly since 2005. What had seemed like irreparable distortions might be fixable with better algorithms. The team went back through the raw CT data slice by slice, applying new correction methods and filling in missing sections where possible. The results were remarkable. Text that had been unreadable became clear. Letters that had been ambiguous could now be identified with confidence. Old debates about what certain passages said were settled definitively. The reprocessed data didn't just improve the existing knowledge, it added entirely new information that changed how researchers understood the mechanism's capabilities. The back portion of the mechanism, which had survived in relatively good condition, turned out to be a masterpiece of astronomical calculation. The upper section features a large spiral dial with 5 complete turns. This spiral tracks 235 lunar months, representing the Metonic cycle. The ancient Greeks had discovered that 19 solar years equal almost exactly 235 lunar months. This relationship allowed them to keep lunar calendars synchronized with the seasons. The mechanism automated this calculation, showing where you were in the cycle at any point. A smaller subsidiary dial connected to this spiral tracks the Calippic cycle, which extends the Metonic period over 76 years. This refinement improved long-term accuracy, accounting for the slight imperfection in the 19-year cycle. The Greeks understood that astronomical patterns weren't perfectly regular over short periods, but became more precise when observed over longer spans of time. Below the Metonic spiral sits another large spiral dial, covering 223 lunar months. This represents the Saros cycle, which the ancient Babylonians had discovered. Every Saros cycle, eclipses repeat in very similar patterns. If you observe a solar eclipse, you can be confident that 223 months later, another eclipse will occur with similar characteristics. The mechanism didn't just display this cycle, it used it to make predictions. Nested inside the Saros spiral is an even smaller dial tracking the exoligmos, a 54-year period that equals 3 complete Saros cycles. This additional refinement corrected for slight timing variations in the Saros pattern, ensuring that eclipse predictions remained accurate over many decades. Another dial on the back marked the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic Games. These were the major athletic competitions of the ancient Greek world, including the Olympic Games. The mechanism could tell you not just when astronomical events would occur, but when the Games would be held at Olympia, Delphi, Nemea, and other sacred sites. These weren't vague estimates or approximate functions. The inscriptions are explicit instructions. For months when eclipses might occur, the mechanism displays specific glyphs identifying whether to expect a solar or lunar eclipse. Additional text describes the time of day, whether the eclipse would be visible from Greece, and even notes about the expected appearance, including shadow direction and coloration. This level of detail shows that the mechanism wasn't just a calculation tool, it was an educational device meant to explain celestial phenomena, not just predict them. The month names inscribed on these dials provided another crucial piece of information. Calendars in the ancient Greek world weren't standardized. Different city-states used different month names and started their years at different times. The names on the Antikythera mechanism don't match the Athenian calendar, which is what many researchers initially expected. Instead, they correspond to a Corinthian-style calendar, suggesting the device was built in a colony founded by Corinth, possibly Syracuse or Epirus. This detail effectively signs the mechanism, identifying its origin even though no maker's name survives. The front of the mechanism presented a different challenge. While the back was relatively intact, the front had been largely destroyed. Only fragments of the front display cover survived, but those fragments contained information that completely changed how researchers approached reconstruction. Published findings from 2016 revealed that these cover inscriptions list specific planetary relationships. The text describes how many synodic cycles each planet completes in a given number of years and zodiac revolutions. A synodic cycle is the time it takes for a planet to return to the same position relative to the Sun as seen from Earth. For instance, Venus completes 5 synodic cycles in almost exactly 8 years. These relationships are mathematically precise, and the inscriptions spell them out explicitly for Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. These inscriptions aren't suggestions or possibilities, they're constraints. Any reconstruction of the front mechanism must produce exactly these ratios. The gears must be arranged so that turning the input handle generates planetary positions that match the specified cycles. This requirement dramatically narrowed the range of possible designs. But satisfying the mathematical constraints wasn't enough. The reconstruction also had to be physically possible. The gears had to fit within the surviving frame. They had to mesh properly without jamming. The design had to be something that ancient craftsmen could actually have built using available tools and materials. And ideally, the solution should use techniques that were known to exist in the ancient world, not invent entirely new mechanisms. This is where artificial intelligence entered the picture. Before engineers could design gear systems, they needed to be absolutely certain about what the inscriptions said. An AI system called Ithaca, developed by researchers at DeepMind, was trained specifically to work with damaged ancient Greek texts. The system learned patterns in the Greek language, common phrases, typical word combinations. When presented with damaged inscriptions where letters were missing or unclear, it could predict the most likely missing text based on context. Working alone, the AI achieved accuracy rates around 62% for predicting missing characters. That might not sound impressive, but for severely damaged text where humans could only guess, it was a significant improvement. When researchers combined the AI predictions with human expertise, accuracy jumped above 70%. This level of confidence allowed engineers to proceed with reconstructions, knowing the textual evidence was solid. The practical demonstration that planetary motion could be modelled mechanically came from the work of Michael Wright, a former curator at the Science Museum in London. In the early 2000s, Wright built working physical models of proposed mechanisms using techniques the ancient Greeks would have had access to. His reconstructions included epicyclic gears, where small gears roll around the inside or outside of larger rings, and pin and slot mechanisms that convert circular motion into variable speed rotation. Wright's models proved that the front display wasn't fantasy. The Greeks had the knowledge and tools to build these mechanisms. His work provided the proof of concept that later researchers would build upon. The final piece came together in 2021 when a team at University College London published a complete mechanical architecture for the front of the mechanism. Their design satisfied every constraint simultaneously. The planetary ratios matched the inscriptions exactly. Everything fits within the available space. The gears could all be manufactured with ancient tools. And critically, nothing collided or jammed when the mechanism was operated. Their solution used a clever arrangement of nested tubes along the central axis. Multiple planetary displays could share the same rotation point without interfering with each other. Instead of having planetary positions shown on separate hands that would overlap, the design arranged them on concentric rings, exactly as the ancient inscriptions described. Gears were shared between different calculations where possible, saving space and reducing complexity. The complete reconstruction, combining the surviving back section with the newly designed front, totals 69 gears. 35 of these are known from surviving fragments. 34 are reconstructed based on the constraints and requirements. This isn't speculation. It's engineering working backward from evidence to find the solution that fits all the requirements. Understanding what the Antikythera mechanism actually did requires imagining yourself as an ancient Greek user. You're standing in front of a bronze box roughly the size of a shoebox. The back is impressive with its spiral dials and inscriptions, but the front is where the magic happens. This is where the cosmos comes alive in bronze and pointer hands. At the very center of the front display sits a small representation of Earth. This isn't surprising. The ancient Greeks, like most cultures of their time, believed Earth was the center of the universe. Everything in the heavens revolved around our world. The mechanism reflects this worldview perfectly. It's not trying to show the universe as it actually is in physical reality. It's showing the universe as it appears from Earth, which for practical purposes of tracking celestial events is exactly what matters. Moving outward from Earth, the next feature is the moon display. This wasn't just a simple pointer. The mechanism included a small sphere, half painted black and half white. Mounted so, it would rotate as it moved around its track. As the mechanism operated, this sphere would turn, showing the current phase of the moon. When the white half faced forward, you'd see a full moon. When the black half faced forward, a new moon. Positions in between showed crescents and gibbous phases. Anyone glancing at the mechanism could immediately see not just where the moon was in the sky, but what it would look like that night. Beyond the moon, 6 concentric rings carried the visible planets known to ancient astronomy. Mercury occupied the innermost planetary ring, followed by Venus, then the Sun, then Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn on the outermost ring. Each planet was represented by a small bead or pointer that moved along its respective ring as you turned the mechanism's handle. The Sun was marked with a golden bead, making it easy to identify at a glance. The rings weren't arbitrary decorations, they were calculation outputs. As you turned the input handle on the side of the mechanism, all the internal gears would rotate according to their specific ratios. Each planetary bead would move at exactly the right speed to track that planet's actual motion through the sky. Venus would complete its cycles faster than Mars. Jupiter would move more slowly than the inner planets. Everything would maintain the proper relationships described in the inscriptions on the front cover. One particularly clever feature was the dragon hand, a serpent-shaped pointer that tracked the moon's nodes. These are the points where the moon's orbit crosses the plane of Earth's orbit around the sun. Eclipses can only occur when the sun and moon are near these nodes. By showing where the nodes were at any given time, the dragon hand indicated when eclipse seasons were occurring. If the dragon hand aligned with the sun's position, you knew to check the Saros dial on the back for specific eclipse predictions. Surrounding all of these planetary rings was the zodiac ring. The ancient Greeks divided the sky into 12 constellations that marked the sun's path through the heavens over the course of a year. The zodiac ring on the mechanism showed which constellation each celestial body was passing through at any given moment. This information was crucial for ancient astronomy and astrology, which weren't clearly separated disciplines in the Greek world. The outermost ring displayed the Egyptian calendar, a 365-day system that the Greeks used alongside their own lunar calendars. This ring could apparently be adjusted to account for leap years, a detail that shows the mechanism's designers understood that the solar year isn't exactly 365 days long. The calendar ring allowed users to coordinate the astronomical information with specific dates. Imagine the experience of actually using this device. You want to know the positions of the planets on a specific date several months in the future. You turn the handle, watching the pointers move around their rings. The moon sphere, moon, rotates, showing you what phase to expect. The planetary beads glide through the zodiac. When the calendar ring shows your target date, you stop turning and read the display. In a single glance, you can see where every visible planet will be, what phase the moon will show, whether eclipse season is approaching, and even which stars will be rising at dawn or setting at dusk based on the zodiac position. The mechanism wasn't just showing positions, it was explaining the cosmos. The ancient Greeks understood that celestial motions followed patterns, but those patterns weren't simple. Planets don't move at constant speeds. They appear to slow down, speed up, even move backwards in the sky for periods of time before resuming their forward motion. These apparent irregularities, called retrograde motion, puzzled ancient astronomers. The Antikythera mechanism had to account for these complexities to produce accurate predictions. The solution involved sophisticated gearing arrangements. Simple, gears can only transfer rotation at constant ratios. But by using epicyclic gears, where smaller gears roll around inside or outside of larger gears, the mechanism could produce variable speed outputs. A planet's pointer wouldn't move at a steady rate. It would speed up and slow down in patterns that match the observed behavior in the sky. This is advanced mechanical engineering by any standard, ancient or modern. What makes this even more impressive is that the mechanism did all of this simultaneously. With one input, one turn of the handle, every display updated in perfect synchronization. The moon moved relative to the sun. The planets advanced through their cycles. The eclipse indicators tracked their patterns. The calendar advanced. Everything stayed coordinated because the gear ratios were calculated to maintain all the proper astronomical relationships at once. The level of accuracy was remarkable. Modern analysis of the gear ratios shows that the mechanism could track planetary positions to within a few degrees over many years. That's not perfect by modern standards, but it's far more accurate than any competing method available in the ancient world. An astronomer using this device could make predictions that would be proven correct night after night. This wasn't a religious artifact or a piece of ceremonial art. It was a practical scientific instrument. Someone built this to answer real questions about when eclipses would occur, where planets would be, what the calendar would show. The extensive inscriptions suggest it may also have served an educational purpose, teaching students about astronomical cycles and celestial mechanics. But its primary function was calculation, pure and simple. The significance of this machine extends far beyond its immediate function. For generations, historians of technology held certain assumptions about the ancient world. Yes, the Greeks and Romans built impressive structures. Yes, they made philosophical and mathematical discoveries that still matter today. But precision mechanical engineering, complex gearing systems, automated computation, those were supposed to be medieval inventions at the earliest, possibly Renaissance developments. The standard narrative held that mechanical clockwork emerged in Europe in the 13th or 14th century, gradually becoming more sophisticated over the following centuries. The Antikythera mechanism demolishes that timeline. Here is physical proof that precision gearing existed in the ancient Mediterranean world, specifically in the Greek cultural sphere, no later than the 1st century BC and probably earlier. The mechanism found in the shipwreck was already old when the ship sank. The technology it represents must have developed over time, meaning there were earlier versions, simpler mechanisms that led up to this sophisticated model. This raises uncomfortable questions. If the Greeks could build this in the 1st century BC, what else could they build that we don't know about? The mechanism survived only by accident, preserved underwater where it couldn't be melted down for scrap bronze. How many similar devices were built and then recycled when they broke? How many were lost in other shipwrecks or destroyed in wars and fires? We have exactly one example of this technology. It's entirely possible, even probable, that it wasn't unique. Even more puzzling is what happened to this knowledge. The mechanism represents a peak of ancient engineering, but it wasn't the foundation for continued development. There's no evidence of improved versions being built in later centuries. No Roman sources describe similar machines. No medieval manuscripts reference this technology. As far as we can tell, the knowledge of how to build such devices was simply lost. This pattern of loss isn't unique to the mechanism. The ancient world achieved many technological capabilities that later disappeared. The recipe for Roman concrete, which could be set underwater and lasted for millennia, was forgotten for centuries. Greek fire, a Byzantine weapon that burned on water, remains mysterious even today. The Library of Alexandria contained knowledge that vanished when it was destroyed. The ancient world wasn't a steady progression toward modern technology. It was a complex landscape of achievements, losses, and rediscoveries. What the Antikythera mechanism proves conclusively is that ancient engineers understood principles we thought were beyond their reach. They knew that mechanical systems could perform calculations. They understood gear ratios well enough to implement complex astronomical relationships in bronze. They could manufacture components with sufficient precision that the systems actually worked reliably. They combined mathematical knowledge with practical craftsmanship to create devices that genuinely deserve to be called computers, even if they operated by entirely mechanical means. The mechanism also reveals something about ancient scientific thought. Building this device required understanding celestial motions, not just as divine mysteries, but as mechanical processes that followed rules. The Greeks who designed this believed the universe operated according to mathematical principles that humans could discover and model. That's a profoundly modern way of thinking about nature, and it existed more than 2,000 years ago. Modern researchers have now created detailed plans for reconstructing the mechanism. Using the constraints from the surviving fragments and inscriptions, combined with knowledge of ancient manufacturing techniques, it's possible to build working replicas. Several have been constructed, and they work exactly as predicted. Turn the handle and the cosmos unfolds according to ancient calculations. The mechanisms don't just work in theory, they work in practice, just as they must have worked for whoever owned the original device. This is why the Antikythera mechanism matters beyond its immediate historical interest. It's proof that human technological capability in the ancient world was far greater than we assumed. It's evidence that sophisticated scientific instruments existed long before the scientific revolution. It demonstrates that knowledge can be lost completely, leaving no trace except by the most unlikely accidents of preservation. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that our ancestors were just as clever as we are. They had different tools and different knowledge, but they were solving complex problems with the same kind of ingenuity that drives innovation today. The mechanism is a message across 2 millennia, telling us that the people who built it understood their universe and had the skill to capture that understanding in bronze gears that still speak to us today.